Hello everyone, I'm here with a Path of Exile theory crafting recording. New uniques were added since I last played. These new uniques gave me a few ideas and I want to share them with you. Let's get started with the Gladiator. I was looking at the gratuitous violence and blood in the eyes major ascendancies. After I read that, I made a link to Hemophilia. I don't know if the Bleed Explode stacks. If it doesn't, I was more interested in the increased attack damage against bleeding enemies and the chance to cause bleeding. This combination here works really well, as far as I'm able to tell. The other good thing about it is where the duelist is on the tree. It's near bloodletting, which would allow you to increase the amount of damage you're doing against bleeding enemies even further. Now, depending on where you go with this tree, there are other things to think of like hematophagy. This increases the damage while leeching. That can work with Carnage Heart. Carnage Heart got a change since I last played. It seems to be a really good amulet now. As far as the weapons, that all depends on where you're going with the tree. I was thinking Varanastra or another high fizz damage weapon. The reason for Varanastra is because of the counts as all one-handed melee weapon types. This gives you a bit more flexibility in terms of the tree. To give you an example of how flexible, we'll go up here to this claw circle. Soulbreaker is, I think, one of the more powerful weapon damage nodes. Now, even though this entire thing works with claws, um, with the chance to steal charges, and of course this, it doesn't matter. Varnastra counts as all one-handed, so this all applies no matter what. So with that, let me move into the next build using Sion. Back in the day, there was a build called the Jackhammer. I think it was around sometime version 2 or before that, if I remember right. Jackhammer builds used Glacial Hammer plus Splash. It was an interesting build, and unfortunately I haven't seen them since then. I think it's due to newer builds being more powerful and all that. I think, however, it can be brought back. The reason for Sion is because of Inquisitor and Elementalist. One of the unfortunate things about doing a build that involves elemental damage is the Reflect. Sibyl's Lament is really the only way to deal with that if you don't have some other method within an Ascendancy or passive. Sibyl's Lament is a low life roll. It's hard to work with in a lot of builds. So Elementalist basically allows you to avoid the need of Sibyl's Lament. Sure, you can stack them if you want to, but it would be hard to do. Inquisitor for the increased elemental damage and increased critical strike chance against enemies affected by elemental ailments. The reason for the critical is because of Kongor's Undying Rage. It seems to be one of the highest DPS mace-based weapons out there. It does have this funky thing that it says you gain Onslaught if you critical strike. So the Sion is next to critical strike nodes. If you did an evade and dodge build, you should be able to run into a good portion of them just by coming down through here, splitting off, going through reflexes up into here, and then eventually going through Constitution all the way out there to the Templar side. Um, the next item is Winter Burial. This requires 40 strength in radius for it to give you its bonuses. It does give cold only splash and additional physical to cold damage conversion. So that's really good. The thing I learned in prior builds is that you need to be one damage type if you can help it. I did notice that elemental damage seems to be more effective than physical due to the nature of curses and penetration. After Winter Burial, I did look at this, the Pandemonius. This might be hard to put in a build, but if you can manage it, this would give you further penetration and cold damage. I haven't looked at the mechanics for Chilled and Frozen since I last played. I know that back in the day, some bosses could be chilled but not frozen. Somebody needs to check me to see if that's still the thing. Let me move into the last build I have for you, also on Sion. The change will be removing Elementalist and going down here to Raider. Raider gives you 4% chance to dodge attacks and Onslaught while in full frenzy charges. This is for use with Oro Sacrifice. My last build used Oro Sacrifice with good efficiency. So I decided to see if I can do it better. I did notice that it could be done better using a similar path to the Jackhammer build using Kongor as a Dying Rage. If you just go through here for reflexes all the way out to acrobatics, you'll run into plenty of crit and elemental nodes. Now, the critical isn't a focus of the build, but I did notice that it does increase your DPS by quite a bit in Path of Building. It's very hard to replace some of the crit nodes out here, but it can be done if you find enough elemental or something. Um, Regardless, the Aura Sacrifice gives you Frenzy charges pretty easy, so that will trigger Raider. Once Raider is triggered, you will have Onslaught to go with those Frenzy charges. People in the past told me that with my prior build I should have done Flicker Strike. The thing with Flicker Strike is that it uses Frenzy charges to remove its cooldown. I noticed that by using Double Strike on a boss, that I was able to sustain my Frenzy charges for longer and thus keep the DPS up higher. So there is that. Both builds will use Kintsugi, the jackhammer in this Oros. Kintsugi is pretty interesting. It basically makes it so that the first hit you take is reduced by 20%. Stack this with Fortify, and then that means the first hit is going to be 40% less. That's pretty insane. Back in the day when I was running Dodge and Evade, there was no damage absorption whatsoever. It was a game of chicken with RNG. So this is really cool. Now, as far as getting Fortify, that's not too hard. You just get Vigilant Strike and put that in a socket. It doesn't really need to be linked to anything. You just need it for the buff. You could link it if you want to, as it can do a lot of damage. It can do more than Double Strike can. It also doesn't require faster attacks to reach good DPS. You can put raw damage in there and it will just chunk. Um, I failed to put it up here on my browser, I noticed, but if you did run Aura Sacrifice, there is a unique jewel that works with Cleave, and it does give you Fortify. Because you are relying on Kintsugi and Fortify, that does work for this build. I would like to thank the streamer I was talking to earlier this morning that pointed me in that direction. So those are the builds I have. Thanks if you listened.